What if history's most renowned tale of divine retribution was merely a celestial mishap? Prepare to uncover how a cataclysmic asteroid strike, which obliterated two of the ancient world's most affluent urban centers, laid the groundwork for one of faith's most enduring ethical lessons. From the true Sodom and Gomorrah, now entombed beneath layers of salt and cinders, to the first-hand accounts that eventually coalesced into hallowed scripture. This is the extraordinary evolution of a natural catastrophe into a divine narrative. The physical evidence endures, yet the surviving chronicle presents a vastly altered reality. Nestled between formidable mountain ranges and the desolate shores of a bitter sea, where the earth itself bore its most profound wound, a veritable paradise had flourished. Crystal-clear springs, ever-flowing, nourished verdant gardens that rivaled the fabled splendor of Eden, while date palms laden with golden fruit swayed gently in warm breezes, perfuming the air with scents more intoxicating than the finest wine. Expansive fields of barley stretched towards the horizon, resembling waves of liquid amber, their kernels so abundant that a single harvest could sustain armies for years. Abraham, observing this improbable verdant expanse threading through the arid landscape, grasped why the Genesis account would immortalize it as well-watered, like the garden of the Lord. 5 magnificent cities, like precious gems scattered by celestial hands, rose from this land of plenty. Sodom and Gomorrah stood at the heart of the valley, their limestone ramparts gleaming with an ivory hue, their bronze gates catching the dawn's first light as merchants from distant realms converged to trade in riches drawn from this blessed soil. Unfathomable wealth seemed to well up from the earth itself. Natural bitumen seeps across the region yielded a dark, precious substance more valued by Egyptian embalmers and Mesopotamian builders than silver, who would pay exorbitant sums for the viscous material that preserved their most significant creations. Majestic caravans, stretching for miles, departed the valley laden with treasures destined to reshape empires. Salt, whiter than newly fallen snow, sulfur as pure as sunlight, and metals extracted from seemingly inexhaustible subterranean veins. The king of Sodom presided from a palace adorned with gold from distant Ophir, his throne room draped in silks that had traversed the entirety of the known world. His banquets commenced at sunset and concluded at sunrise, tables groaning under the weight of delicacies that would have bankrupted lesser kingdoms, honey from sacred groves, wine aged in caverns carved from living rock, and fruits that grew nowhere else on earth. Gomorrah's sovereign, Bera, matched his neighbor's extravagance with palaces constructed from quarried marble, their courtyards alive with the music of constantly flowing fountains. Here, artisans from every nation gathered to craft marvels, intricate mosaics telling stories in precious stones, sculptures imbued with a lifelike quality that seemed to breathe in the morning light, and tapestries woven with threads of silver and gold, capturing scenes from myth and legend. Each of the 3 smaller cities possessed its own distinct character and prosperity. Adma's exceptionally skilled metalworkers forged bronze of unparalleled strength, their clandestine techniques passed down through generations of artisans who marked their creations with symbols signifying divine inspiration. Zeboam commanded a vital nexus where great trade routes converged, its bustling markets overflowing with goods that had undertaken improbable journeys, ivory from the heart of Africa, pearls from uncharted seas, and spices capable of preserving meat for years without spoilage. Only tiny Zoar remained modest amidst its opulent neighbors, its inhabitants content with humble prosperity rather than the intoxicating excesses that defined the greater cities. Here, merchants found honest dealings and equitable measures, travelers encountered genuine hospitality, and children played in streets where laughter echoed freely, unmarred by the undertones of cruelty or decadence. Into this idyllic setting arrived Lot, Abraham's nephew, guiding his flocks down from hills where grazing had become scarce. The young man's eyes widened in astonishment at the valley's bounty. Grass that remained vibrant through seasons when other pastures withered, and water that flowed clear and sweet from springs, seemingly blessed by heaven itself. His uncle had generously offered him first choice of territory, and the decision was immediate. "I shall choose the plain," Lot declared, his voice thick with awe at the prosperity laid out before him. The cities beckoned like alluring sirens, their formidable walls promising security, their vibrant markets offering opportunities far beyond his wildest imaginings. A mere shepherd could ascend to the status of a merchant prince in such a locale, and his children could inherit fortunes beyond measure. Abraham watched his nephew's descent toward Sodom, his gaze imbued with a sorrow deeper than farewell. The patriarch's prophetic foresight perceived undercurrents beneath the valley's superficial beauty, a moral decay festering behind marble facades, a spiritual corruption nurtured by wealth and comfort as assiduously as a gardener tends poisonous blooms. The city's abundance came at a price few recognized until the reckoning arrived. Within Sodom's imposing walls, Lot discovered that prosperity had indeed transformed its inhabitants as profoundly as it had enriched them. The ancient laws of hospitality, foundational to desert life, had been perverted into ostentatious displays of wealth rather than genuine care for sojourners. Merchants competed to showcase their riches through increasingly lavish gestures, while the impoverished were relegated to the shadows cast by opulent edifices. Surrounding each city, sacred groves had been corrupted into sites for Canaanite fertility rites, enacted in ways that would have appalled earlier generations. Ancient oaks, silent witnesses to the world's nascent stages, now provided sanctuary for the priests of Moloch, their bronze furnaces fashioned like the hungry arms of their deity. As furnace fires ignited the metal to incandescent heat, children were placed upon those searing limbs as offerings to ensure continued prosperity. The screams emanating from these groves echoed throughout the valley, yet the populace had grown adept at silencing their ears and hearts to sounds that might disturb their comfort. Gold could purchase a multitude of things, including the quiescence of consciences that had once known shame. What mattered was the uninterrupted harvest, the continuous flow of bitumen, and the arrival of caravans bearing goods from the farthest reaches of the earth. Marble chambers within the cities housed sites of temple prostitution, flourishing under the guise of sacred mysteries. Devotees believed they were participating in rituals that would enhance their prosperity and fertility, while men and women alike served as conduits for ceremonies that reduced the divine spark within humanity to mere commerce. The priests overseeing these debaucheries grew corpulent on offerings, their temples accumulating treasures rivaling royal hoards. Justice itself devolved into a commodity, bought and sold in marketplaces where the law bent to the will of those possessing sufficient gold to manipulate it. The powerful preyed upon the weak with the calculated precision of predators, their methods honed over generations. Courts that ought to have defended the innocent instead became instruments of oppression, their verdicts predetermined by the weight of coin rather than the merits of the cases. Amidst this pervasive moral decay, masked as civilization's zenith, Lot found himself gradually morphing from the simple shepherd he once was into something more hardened and calculating. The city's golden promises proved as intoxicating as its potent wine, each success fueling greater ambitions, each compromise making the next betrayal easier to rationalize. His flocks multiplied into vast herds, his modest tent yielding to a substantial dwelling near the city gates, his plain attire replaced by garments that signaled his ascending status. Yet, even as corruption permeated human hearts, the heavens began to exhibit phenomena that would have alarmed earlier generations possessed of greater wisdom. Multiple celestial wanderers appeared in unusual configurations, their trajectories defying the ordered patterns that had guided navigators since time immemorial. These heavenly messengers traced paths across the nocturnal firmament that seemed to spell out warnings in a language predating human speech. The moon swelled larger each night, its visage shifting like that of a living entity experiencing profound emotion. Aurora-like lights, more vivid than any terrestrial rainbow, danced across skies where such phenomena had never been documented. These celestial displays painted the darkness with hues beyond earthly nomenclature, their movements suggesting an intelligence behind their captivating beauty. Animals across the region began exhibiting behavior that unnerved even those accustomed to disregarding portents. Cattle, despite abundant pasture, refused to graze near the cities, their eyes rolling white with a terror at sights imperceptible to human vision. Birds migrated southward at an unseasonable time, their instincts screaming warnings of dangers approaching from beyond the visible horizon. Throughout the night, Dogs howled at empty skies, their voices rising in harmonious laments that spoke of pack knowledge accumulated over millennia. These creatures, intimately connected to humanity, yet still possessing wild wisdom, sensed approaching doom with a prescience that surpassed any human prophecy. Their warnings went unheeded by masters who had grown deaf to any voice that spoke of consequences for their actions. Even the earth itself began to murmur, offering omens to those still capable of perception. Wells that had flowed cold for centuries suddenly warmed without discernible cause, their waters carrying subtle flavors that hinted at profound subterranean transformations. Fruits ripened in the depths of winter, trees bore blossoms out of season, and the very atmosphere grew thick with scents belonging to entirely different climates. The faint aroma of sulfur began to emanate from deep within the earth, barely perceptible at first, but intensifying with each passing day. This scent, familiar from the bitumen seeps that had enriched the region, now carried an unsettling undertone that caused sensitive nostrils to recoil. Something was stirring in the earth's core, primal forces that had slumbered since the world's inception were awakening. Ground that had remained stable for millennia developed hairline fractures that appeared overnight and widened by degrees too subtle for casual observation. These fissures formed patterns that appeared almost deliberate, as if the earth itself were preparing to cleave along predetermined fault lines. Shepherds reported that their flocks instinctively avoided certain areas where the fractures were most pronounced, their animals' instincts recognizing dangers that human eyes could not discern. The very night air grew peculiar, carrying sounds that seemed to emanate from vast distances. Rumblings like approaching chariots, whispers in languages that predated human utterance, melodies suggesting choirs rehearsing for some cosmic performance. Those few citizens who still retained spiritual sensitivity found themselves unable to sleep, their dreams plagued by visions of celestial fire descending like rain. Ancient astronomical records, meticulously kept by temple priests whose knowledge stretched back through generations of diligent observation, described similar celestial alignments from epochs so distant they had faded into legend. These weathered tablets spoke of prior occasions when the wandering stars had performed such cosmic ballets, and the catastrophic consequences that had ensued. Cities had vanished, empires had crumbled, entire populations had been scattered like leaves before a hurricane. Yet, the priests possessing this knowledge found their warnings dismissed by rulers intoxicated by prosperity. Kings and merchants alike relegated this ancient wisdom to mere desert superstition, preferring to place their faith in stone fortifications and bronze armies, rather than heeding voices that spoke of powers beyond human comprehension. They had forged their paradise through human ingenuity and endeavor. Surely human strength would suffice to safeguard their achievements. In the marketplaces where wealth flowed with unparalleled abundance, fortune-tellers from distant lands began appearing with increasing frequency. These seers recounted visions that had compelled them to leave their comfortable homes and seek out the cities of the plain, their messages remarkably consistent despite originating from sources that had never communicated with one another. Fire, they prophesied, would descend from the heavens, transforming bounty into desolation, reducing mighty ramparts to rubble and ash. The populace greeted these pronouncements with the derision that sophisticated individuals had always reserved for primitive superstitions. They had, after all, conquered nature itself, transforming barren wastelands into gardens that surpassed anything their ancestors could have conceived. Their engineering prowess had conjured aqueducts that transported water across impossible distances, and their architectural triumphs had yielded edifices that seemed to scrape the very dome of heaven. What could the gods possibly inflict upon them that human ingenuity and determination could not overcome? Their wealth could procure armies, their technology could surmount natural obstacles, and their civilization represented the ultimate triumph of reason over the primordial chaos that had governed earlier eras. They had transcended the limitations that bound lesser peoples to lives of subsistence and fear. However, even as they disregarded the warnings, a nascent, unconscious awareness of impending danger began to manifest in the preparations of some among them. Affluent merchants quietly began diversifying their assets, transferring portions of their fortunes to distant cities, where political instability represented the gravest threat they could envision. Military commanders reinforced their garrisons and strengthened their fortifications, rationalizing these actions as prudent precautions against earthly adversaries. The most sensitive souls within the population sought pretexts for travel, their subconscious minds compelling them to distance themselves from sources of unease they could not consciously articulate. Caravans departing the valley carried a greater number of passengers than usual, while the influx of immigrants drawn by the promise of the city's prosperity dwindled to a trickle. The valley's magnetic allure, which had captivated fortune seekers for generations, was beginning to reverse its polarity. Within his residence near Sodom's gates, Lot felt the palpable weight of an approaching crisis settling upon his shoulders like a shroud woven from shadows. His uncle Abraham's teachings echoed in his memory, ancient tenets emphasizing the paramount importance of hospitality, justice, and a recognition of divine authority. These principles now seemed quaint and anachronistic in a world where success was measured by accumulation rather than character. Yet, a stirring within the merchant prince's heart acknowledged that the prosperity surrounding him rested on foundations far less stable than they appeared. The wealth that had elevated him from humble shepherd to a figure of note had come at a cost he was only beginning to comprehend. His children were maturing in an environment where cruelty was perceived as entertainment and corruption as sophistication, where the vulnerable existed solely to serve the strong, and where a conscience was a luxury few could afford. The Jordan Valley stretched vast beneath skies that painted each sunset with hues more magnificent than any artist could capture, while the cities of the plain reveled in their triumph over nature's constraints. Their walls gleamed with reflected light, their marketplaces pulsed with ceaseless activity, and their temples resonated with hymns praising human achievement above all else. But in the distant reaches of space, beyond the grasp of human observation, ancient forces were converging towards a cosmic appointment, ordained long before the first city raised its walls. The celestial wanderer destined to cleave the heavens like a fiery sword was hurtling towards its fate, carrying within its cosmic heart the power to transform paradise into legend, abundance into memory, and triumph into humanity's most enduring cautionary narrative. The era of innocence was drawing to a close, though few recognized the heralds of its demise. Soon, tranquil nights would yield to terrors beyond human conception. Prosperous days would be consumed by fires hotter than any furnace, and the golden cities would become mere whispers of dread among generations yet unborn. But for this fleeting moment, before destiny claimed its due, the sun still cast its golden light upon gleaming stone walls, children still played in streets where laughter echoed without irony, and the Jordan Valley remained the closest semblance of paradise mortal eyes had ever beheld. The end was approaching with cosmic inevitability, yet the beauty destined to perish possessed a quality that would ensure its remembrance long after the flames had subsided and the desert winds had scattered the ashes. Tomorrow would bring strangers to Sodom's gates, heralds of the approaching conclusion. But today, bathed in the golden light of afternoon, the cities of the plain stood in their resplendent glory, unwitting monuments to both human achievement and human blindness, destined to become the yardstick by which divine judgment would be understood, until the very stars grew cold and dark beneath the spreading oaks of Mamre, where shadows danced in patterns predating human memory. Abraham sat in the opening of his tent as the day reached its scorching zenith. Heat waves rose from the desert floor like ethereal flames, distorting the horizon until earth and sky merged into an indistinguishable haze. In this hour, when even the hardiest travelers sought refuge, when the very air shimmered with furnace-like intensity, three figures materialized on the distant path. Their approach defied the desert's unforgiving logic, where others moved with the cautious deliberation of those acutely aware of the sun's lethal power. These strangers advanced with an unhurried confidence, their garments unstained by dust, their countenances devoid of the exhaustion that marked all who ventured forth in such oppressive heat. As they drew nearer, an indefinable quality in their demeanor caused Abraham's weathered heart to leap with a recognition that transcended ordinary understanding. Without a moment's hesitation, the patriarch rose and ran towards them, an act that would have appeared utterly irrational to any observer, for no man of his advanced years should have possessed such vitality in the day's crushing heat. His voice carried across the desolate expanse as he uttered the ancient invocation of hospitality. "My lords, if I have found favor in your sight, do not pass by your servant. What followed was a repast prepared with supernatural swiftness, as if time itself had bent to accommodate divine intentions. Sarah, his wife, prepared cakes from their finest flour, while Abraham selected a tender calf from his herd. The sustenance materialized before the guests with a celerity that suggested more than mortal efficiency, while bowls of curdled milk and bread, still warm from hastily constructed ovens, were placed beside them. As his enigmatic guests partook of earthly fare, their words carried a weight that pressed against the very boundaries of human comprehension. They spoke of Sarah bearing a son despite her advanced age, of promises that would irrevocably alter the destiny of nations. Yet, beneath these wondrous pronouncements ran darker currents, the palpable scent of impending judgment hanging in the air, like smoke from distant conflagrations. When two of the visitors departed towards the valley, where Sodom's gleaming ramparts caught the afternoon light, Abraham found himself walking alongside the third, whose very presence seemed to command the surrounding elements. In the encroaching twilight, as the stars commenced their eternal ballet across the desert sky, the patriarch learned the reason for his divine guest's continued presence. The Lord's voice resonated with the profound authority of the cosmos as he revealed his purpose. The outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is indeed great, and their sin is exceedingly grave. I shall descend and ascertain if events have transpired precisely as the clamor reaching me suggests. What unfolded was a negotiation that would resonate through countless ages, a mere mortal man imploring celestial justice for the souls of the unrighteous. Abraham's voice conveyed the profound weight of desperate optimism as he commenced his meticulously crafted discourse. Would you truly eradicate the upright alongside the wicked? Envision 50 virtuous individuals residing within the settlement. Would you then obliterate the entire community and show no clemency for those 50 righteous souls within it? The ancient exchange continued, a back-and-forth rhythm. The numbers dwindled, much like leaves scattered by an autumn breeze. 50 righteous souls, then 45, then 40, then 30, then 20. Each reduction brought Abraham nearer to the grim reality he had apprehended, from the very instant his divine visitor spoke of impending judgment. At last, with a voice barely audible, he voiced his final fervent appeal. Pray, do not let the sovereign be displeased, and I shall speak yet again, though only this once. What if 10 such individuals are discovered there? For the sake of 10, I shall not bring ruin, was the response that sealed the destiny of Sodom, while simultaneously unveiling the boundless depths of divine compassion. As the gloaming deepened into night, 2 figures approached the imposing ramparts where Lot was concluding his day's transactions. The magnate had risen far beyond his humble origins as a shepherd. His prominent position near the thoroughfare served as a testament to his standing among the esteemed citizens. Yet, something about the approaching strangers evoked recollections of his uncle's teachings regarding hospitality, a virtue as sacred as one's own lifeblood. While the other inhabitants of Sodom perceived merely travel-worn wanderers of no particular consequence, Lot sensed something that caused his spirit to tremble. Their gazes held a profundity that seemed to mirror starlight from celestial realms beyond human perception, and their movements possessed an otherworldly grace, indicative of beings for whom terrestrial laws were mere suggestions rather than absolute mandates. Rising to his feet, Lot bowed deeply in the time-honored fashion, his voice imbued with genuine warmth, as he extended the invitation that would forever distinguish him from his adopted city. My esteemed sirs, pray turn aside to your humble servant's abode, and pass the night and refresh yourselves. Then may you depart early on your journey. The traveler's initial demurral followed the customary path of polite engagement. Nay, we shall rest in the public square. However, Lot's earnestness surpassed mere social convention. Something in their presence stirred prophetic echoes he had inherited from Abraham's lineage, warnings that whispered of dangers far exceeding ordinary human comprehension. I implore you, my lords, do not tarry in the square this night, he insisted, with an intensity that even surprised him. Within the labyrinthine streets of the settlement after dusk, wayfarers faced perils that extended beyond simple larceny or aggression. The municipality's pervasive corruption had nurtured appetites that preyed upon innocence itself, cravings that no material wealth could satiate and no decree could restrain. Finally yielding to his passionate entreaties, the strangers accompanied Lot to his dwelling, where he prepared a repast, despite the advanced hour. Bread was fashioned, wine was poured, and water was heated for the ablution of feet caked with the dust of lengthy travels. Yet, even as hospitality flowed like a soothing balm, darkness was coalescing within the city's twisted core. News of the strangers' arrival disseminated through Sodom's thoroughfares with the rapidity of wildfire, igniting dry tinder. In convivial establishments where spirits loosened tongues already inclined toward malevolent discourse. In establishments of ill repute where coin procured that which love should freely bestow. In secluded chambers where the affluent plotted their subsequent exploitation of the vulnerable. Whispers conveyed tidings of fresh quarry delivered directly to their thresholds. What ensued was a phenomenon that laid bare the utter depth of Sodom's moral decay. From every corner of the metropolis they converged, the young and the old, the affluent and the destitute, united by an insatiable appetite that transcended all boundaries of age, social standing, and natural affection. This was not the act of a criminal fringe, but the manifestation of desires that had infected the entire populace, akin to a pestilence coursing through corrupted blood. They encircled Lot's residence like wolves closing in on wounded prey. Their voices, raised in clamorous demands, transformed the nocturnal atmosphere into something thick with malice. "Where are the men who have entered your dwelling this night?" they bellowed in unison. "Bring them forth that we may acquaint ourselves with them." In that decisive instant, the full gravity of Sodom's apostasy from grace was starkly revealed. These were not ignorant brutes driven by primal instinct, but sophisticated denizens of a flourishing civilization who had consciously chosen to transmute themselves into beings far more depraved than beasts. Their corruption was informed, deliberate, and absolute. Evil perfected through generations of practice until it had become as innate as respiration. Lot positioned himself between his guests and the baying throng, his voice quivering with horror at the transformation his adopted city had undergone. "I implore you, my brethren, do not engage in such wicked deeds," he pleaded, fully aware, even as he spoke, that his words would fall upon ears attuned only to the siren call of their own base desires. What transpired next would forever haunt Lot for the remainder of his days. An offer so desperate, so morally compromised, that it demonstrated the profound extent to which even righteous individuals could be tainted by proximity to absolute wickedness. They had transcended mere carnal desire, venturing into territories where the transgression of divine order itself had become their intoxicant. "Step aside," they roared in unison. "This individual came as a sojourner, and now he presumes to act as judge. Now we shall treat you far worse than them." What they pursued was not simple gratification, but the deliberate annihilation of all that remained pure in their world. The strangers embodied otherness, mystery, perhaps even divinity itself, qualities that their corrupted souls could not tolerate. They would violate these visitors not out of lust, but from an aversion to the transcendent, from a need to drag down anything that reminded them of their own abandonment. As the throng pressed forward with a violence that threatened to dismantle Lot's dwelling, stone by stone, the strangers finally revealed their true nature. Hands emerged from within the entryway, hands that moved with an authority over forces that governed reality itself. Every member of the mob, from the youngest to the eldest, was instantly afflicted with blindness, so profound that they could not even locate the very portal they had been besieging. But this was not merely physical impairment. What afflicted them was spiritual darkness made tangible, the inner corruption of their souls manifesting as the failure of their corporeal sight. They stumbled about like mariners lost in a midnight ocean, their fingers scrabbling at empty air, while the entrance to Lot's abode remained as inaccessible as if it resided in another dimension entirely. Even amidst their supernatural affliction, they persisted in their assault, exhausting themselves in futile attempts to locate that which their blindness had concealed. This tenacity underscored the ultimate tragedy of Sodom's corruption, evil so absolute that not even divine intervention could divert it from its chosen course. Within the sanctuary of the house, the strangers shed their final pretense of mortality. When they spoke now, their voices resonated with harmonies that echoed in dimensions beyond human comprehension, while their forms blazed with a light too intense for unshielded eyes to endure. These were not men, but emissaries of divine justice, angels whose terrestrial presence signified that heaven itself had taken cognizance of the events unfolding in the cities of the plain. "Have you any others here?" they inquired of Lot, with an urgency that transcended mortal temporality. "Your sons-in-law, your sons, your daughters, or anyone else you possess in this city, bring them forth from this place, for we are about to lay waste to this site, as the outcry concerning its inhabitants has ascended greatly before the Lord, and the Lord has dispatched us to annihilate it." Lot's undertaking to warn his kin exposed the full extent to which Sodom's venom had permeated even righteous households. His sons-in-law, men who ought to have placed the patriarch